Kia ora, everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar where we'll be looking at the loan features in Vernon CMS. I'll just walk you through some of the key files and fields that we have in the system and a few specific features that are tied directly to the loans processes. So I'm just in our demo system where we've got a small set of sample records. So one of the things that we can first do to manage loans is if they're inward loans, we can distinguish those from the main records in our collection through the procedural status field. So the procedural status field at the top left of the identification screen describes the legal status of each of the items within your collection. Most of the records are going to be accessioned, but we can have other statuses. So for example, inward loan might be a status to distinguish all the things which you've borrowed from other organizations. So I could use advanced search just to pull out all the inward loans that I have in my demo system. When I'm in the advanced search screen, if you're clicked into the search fields box, you can press the first letter of a field to jump to the next thing starting with that letter. So if I typed in P, each time I press P, it'll jump down there. So I'm wanting to go to procedural status. So that's one quick way I could jump down to it. If I'm not sure what statuses are available, I can just use the options button and I'll pick inward loan. And we've just got a handful of inward loans in our system, so it's found 18 of those. And then I can bring them back to the cataloging screen. So on each of those records, you might have just the minimal amount of information you need to record to keep track of them. So because they're still in the main object file, that means you can do things like manage the locations. So all of the location functions are available in full on any of these inward loan records. So we can see that at the moment this is stored in one of the racks in our storeroom, but it might be about to go on display as part of an exhibition. If I look for just one specific inward loan, so I've got one which is a photograph of Marlborough Road. We can see other details about loans where they're things that are from our own collection where we've lent them to somebody else. So this particular record, if I was lending this to somebody else, the procedural status is still going to be accessioned because it's something we legally own. But on the most basic level, we can use the location fields to mark that that's been lent out to somebody. So I could do a move of this particular record, which is currently in store. And I could say that the whole of the object is moving for a specific reason. And so it's in the location reason field that we can distinguish moves that are specifically for lending to somebody else. So I could say, well, that's a short-term loan. It's likely that's not going to be within a location that you control. So the location column's used to maintain a hierarchy of buildings, floors, and rooms that are within your own control. But the external column links to our person and organization database. So with an outward loan, it's most likely that this particular record's gone out to another organization or individual, and they're responsible for that object from that point. So usually in the location column, we would have a pseudo location just to indicate it's gone outside of our control. Within our demo system, we've just got a generic term that's called external location. And then in the external column, I can select either an existing person record or I could create a new one if I needed to. I could type in gallery and I could pick that it's been lent out to Jack Fisher Gallery. And then I can click on OK, and that's going to update just the current location. We still know that when it comes back, it's supposed to go to a particular area of our storage. As well as the location fields, the cataloging module also has some text fields for summarizing exhibitions and loans relating to each record. I'm just going to search for a particular object number 157, and that's one of our inward loans. On the left-hand side in the navigator, we've got the exhibition and loans page, which is data held just in the cataloging module on each individual catalog record. So we can see that for this particular work, we might not have a full agreement linked into Vernon about that particular loan, but we're able to use the loan and details field, which is a text field that's unlimited in its length, to summarize any of the information that we want to hold in Vernon about that loan. So that's important for the organizations that are just using the cataloging module in Vernon. We could also use the document references page to link other material that's outside of Vernon. So again, I'll open up one of the existing records. I'll search for object 313. So this is a natural science specimen. And if I clicked on the document references page, we can see that the external files table lets us link to files that are outside of the system. So that might be important for an inward loan, where we might have the loan agreement as a signed document in PDF form or a Word document, and we can link that permanently to the record. You just need to carefully consider where those are stored on your network. So you'd usually have a designated space where you're linking those files permanently into Vernon so that people aren't shifting around those files and renaming them. So this is a background file about that particular specimen, but it could be a loan agreement, an entry receipt, or any other kind of material that relates to processes as this object was acquired or moved in and out. If I search for one of the vases in our collection, I can show you how we can use the optional activities module to manage loans in more detail. Related activities for each record will show in the management activities page on the left, and we can see from the tick that this particular object does have some activities that have already been associated with it. So in fact, this object we managed through several different steps in its lifetime at the organization. There was originally an acquisition proposal, deciding whether we wanted to actually acquire this object or maybe a group of objects. An insurance policy was taken out on it. There's been several outward loans that it's been associated with. We've got a general article page as a topic record that describes the vases that this particular pottery was well known for creating. And there's also transport and exhibition venue records. So in this case, I'm just going to open up one of those related loans. I can double click on that, and that will go to the activities module, to the dedicated file for managing outward loans. If I scroll down on the left, we can see that there's about 15 different processes that are managed in detail in the activities module in Vernon CMS. So as well as acquisitions and deaccessions, as things arrive and leave your particular collection, we can manage all of the things that happen in between, from conservation to loans to exhibitions to rights management. All of these activities work in the same way. They always have a status field to say whereabouts is this process actually up to, and then they have core information that's similar, such as the links to all the related objects and related activities, and then general management details to say who's responsible for that process and what are general flags and statuses that you want to assign as you work through that. So this particular loan's a request to be received. It was never approved, but we've got the details that were recorded as part of that. If I go back to the management activities page, I could go to one of the other ones. And so this is a loan where it's showing me a particular step that we've enabled in Vernon to lock this record when it reaches a particular step. So this is a loan that did go ahead. The loan's since been completed and the objects have been returned. And we've set a rule in Vernon to lock those records down once they've reached that point in their lifetime. So this is a loan where we can see that it was managing 11 different objects that were borrowed by one related museum. And so that's one of the things that we can do in the activities module. We can take a whole group of objects that are involved in the same process and manage that in one single record. So all of these 11 objects will have this link where they can see the shared information about the outward loans. If I click on the button at the top, it will list all of the objects that are involved in that process. And we can see that there's also a separate table for listing any objects that have subsequently been rejected from that process. So you might decide that some of those particular objects are too valuable or too sensitive and can't be lent, or there may be some where you're still considering whether they should be in the loan or not. And then on the second tab, we can also link to related activities. So all of those different activity processes can interrelate sometimes. So an outward loan might require you to do a condition report in advance, and you could link those condition reports to the loan record. We can see for this example that there was an insurance policy. We managed the movement of those objects, planning that out in advance. And the purpose of this loan was for an exhibition. So we've actually created a record about that exhibition and linked it to the same loan. These interlinked activities are important because Vernon can flag things that are in conflict in terms of their dates. So if two different curators both wanted to organise loans to different places at the same time, Vernon will automatically warn you if there's a conflict for those dates. If the objects are actually in a group of activities that relate together, then those dates are allowed to overlap. So for instance, the length of the loan might be for a certain period, but the exhibition is also for part of that period. It's a subset of that time. And as long as those two activities are linked, that will be allowed as a process. You can have the exhibition going on at the same time as the whole loan is covered as well. So each of those loans, we can gradually work through those steps, and then we can also set rules and actions at each of those points. So you can require certain fields of information, for example, and you can also have things like reports and emails automatically generated at each step. So if I go to the first loan that I looked at, where it was a request that was received, we could actually go ahead on that and update the dates. So I could say, well, I've got a request received. Let's advance that now to being approved. And we'll update the dates. And say that's going to happen late this year. Oh, I'll put a date range there that it's not letting me do, so the end date has to be after the start date, so let's update that first. And so now I can save that record. We can also automatically schedule things in the diary for people. So there's a diary which the system can check each time you log into the system, and we can set sundry tasks that people need to remember to do as part of this process. So that might be organising the certificate for insurance, or perhaps doing a facilities report of the venue that it's going to ensure that they actually have the facilities to properly care for these objects. Over time, those loans might have gone out, and then the loan might actually be extended at some point with some of the conditions around that loan changing. So rather than just extending the date, we might actually renew that loan as a new loan record so we can then fine-tune some of the details about it. If I bring up a loan that's already currently out on loan and we want to renew it, I could search on procedural status like we were doing before with the object file. And if I use options, I'm wanting all of the objects in loans which are currently fully dispatched, so they're still at the lender, or where renewal has been approved. And there's a couple of loans that we have in our system at those two steps. So this particular loan is at the V&A in London, and we've already marked that it should be allowed to be renewed. It hasn't yet been renewed, so we can go through that process. First, we have to have that particular loan that we're wanting to renew already open in the screen. And once we have it open, menu options under Tools, Activities Management Tools, Outward Loan Renew will get enabled. So that option's only enabled if you're looking at a loan record on screen and that loan is at an appropriate status to allow renewal to happen. So I'll click on yes, that I want to renew that current loan. And so what it's done is it's created a brand new loan record, copying over all the relevant information from the previous loan. So whatever objects that were involved in the loan, the lender, the details, and so on. But now this is a new record. We could fine-tune some of that information. So it might have a new range of dates that you've agreed for this loan renewal. So it might be from today until mid next year. We might update other information. Maybe the contact details has changed, or perhaps some of the details of the people that are involved in this loan have changed. I can then save that record. And so now that particular object will show that it's been involved in two different loan agreements. So I'll go back to the object file and we'll look at that particular brain sculpture. And so we can see now those two different loan periods. So that renewal process is something that you have to configure so that Vernon knows what are the appropriate statuses where those things can be allowed to happen. And so that's done under System Maintenance. So if I go to Tools, System Maintenance, Activities Configuration, and then it's in the Loan Renewal tab. So that just has the IDs of different statuses that are valid to indicate that a loan renewal has been approved, and where that approval was then gone ahead and been renewed, it's got a status specifically to mark them as generated, and on the new loan, it'll mark that it's a renewal rather than a loan that's gone through all of the previous steps. So we can just use the options button to see all of the available statuses in the outward loan file. So all of that data is building up and is then usable under the generic tools that we would use in the object file. So we can do searches and reports like we would do in objects. So I could click on an outward loan and I could search for a particular borrower. So I could search in the top toolbar for Portage Museum. And I'd be able to bring back those three different loans that we've had for Portage Trust Museum. We can also use the advanced search option to do a step-by-step search on multiple different fields. So that might be something that you need to do as part of periodic reporting of statistics. So I could click on advanced search, and we could say that we're interested in everything that was a particular procedural status. So maybe everything where the objects are currently dispatched. So this might be part of yearly stats to say how many objects are currently out on loan. So at the moment, there's no objects that are out on loan. I could do the same thing on the inward loan file where I've got more records. So let's look for all of the inward loans where they're currently loan proposed. There's 6 loans that fit in under that status, and then I could narrow that down further. Maybe you're only interested in the loans of a particular type. Again, that's a term file where we can have authority terms appropriate to our own collection, and I've got a category of short-term loan. And so 3 of those were short-term loans. I might then narrow it down by dates, again to do an annual report on the statistics. So maybe I'm interested in how many loans went through proposed status in the last decade, in the 2010s. So I could search on start date. And the date fields accept a range of dates. So we could say everything that was from 1st of January 2010, ... 31st of December 2019. And all 3 of those were in that period. And then I could click on Finish to return back to the inward loan screen. I could also run reports on those, and so I could use the same reporting tools we would use in Object, including the word merge facility. That's particularly important for activity records where you might want to be generating agreements. So you can generate word merge reports that do complex agreements with a whole lot of static information that's embedded as part of that. I've got an existing loan agreement that I've already set up. So I could say that I'm wanting to do a report on those. Actually, maybe I'll just pick the first of those 3. So I've got just the first inward loan, and I'm going to run a report. I can click on more templates to see what report templates I've saved in the past. And we can see that we've set up a word merge, which is an inward loan agreement. And then I could choose to run that and just send it to the screen. I don't have Word open, so it'll open up Word for me, and then it'll generate the agreement according to the template that I have in Word, and then the data that's in the particular record that I was using. So we can see we've done things like include a logo, we've included borders and frames using Word tables, and then we've also included a whole lot of static content, which will be the same for every record that we ever use this template for. So that's just text that we've entered in the template in Word. If I run that loan agreement on a record where there were a lot of objects, so I'll just look at one of the loans where I've got more than one object. So all of the Rodney Funston prints that we were looking at the beginning all came in on one loan. And there are 11 different prints that came in as part of that. So if I do the same report, we'll see one of the limitations of the word merge template, and then I'll show you ways that we could work around that. The system will automatically remember report templates that we've used recently. So it's defaulting that as one of my recent reports. And so I'll just double click on that and we'll run this. And so what I wanted to note was the object information. The word merge process works at the individual record level within Vernon. So at this point, we're dealing with one single record, which represents a particular loan. The object information is just in one field of that record, so we don't have a lot of control about the formatting of that content within the particular loan agreement. So we can show that just as a single block of text. However, you might want to have more complex formatting there, and you may want to include the images of those particular objects. The only way we can do that is by having a separate template, which is for an attached object schedule. So that's an object-based report where each of the objects then are a separate record for word merge to work with. And then it's got all of the properly separated information of cataloging fields and the information about any linked images for those. So if I go back to Vernon, I've already set up a schedule of the objects to go with this inward loan, and I've already linked it as a quick report. So I'll show you in a minute how we set that up, but I'll run an example first. So that's under Report, Quick Reports, and it will show any of the reports that have already been linked into the inward loan procedure. So I've got 4 different reports that have been linked at different points, and one of those is this word merge loan schedule. And we can see that's not reporting on the inward loan file. It's taking the inward loan record and finding the related object records. And it's the object records that it will be using to run this report. So I'll click on OK. It'll give me a preview of the objects that are in that report. And I just want all of those included. And that's then generating a separate report where we've got complete control over the formatting of each individual object record. So I could have a column for each image, and I could have columns for any of the related information about each of the objects. And so those quick reports are part of setting up the procedural statuses for that file. So that's where we're setting up all of the different things we've talked about coming into play as we move through the statuses. So setting up fields to check and actions to automatically perform, like saved reports. So I'm going to review the inward loan status file and show you where each of those different things are set up. We'll go to other files, and I'll say that I'm looking for inward loan status. And then I'll just look at a few of the different statuses we've already got set up. So each of those statuses will say whether or not you're allowed to start new records at that point. So loan proposed makes sense as a starting point for the procedure. And it'll say what statuses you're allowed to advance to after that. On the second tab, we can set up any prerequisites, so any fields that we need to check before somebody's allowed to advance to that status. And so I've set up a number of those for loan proposed, and each of those will have the effect of preventing the person from saving the record. You can set this up just as a warning, is the other option that's available, in which case, if a record fails that check, it'll just warn them, but they'll still be allowed to save and maybe go back and look up that information and return to fill it in at a later point. So I'm checking that the lender field is unspecified or blank, and that's going to block somebody from saving it. And then a whole bunch of other fields, we're doing the same kind of check. If we advance to the loan approved status, which was the second one that I picked, we can see that on the last tab, we've linked 2 particular reports. And so this will do 2 things. Firstly, whenever somebody changes a loan to be approved, it will automatically produce both of those reports. So you don't need to browse and find your loan agreement and browse and find your object schedule. And then secondly, because we've linked them to a status, they'll always be available through the quick reports menu. So you could always go back to a historic loan and reprint the agreement because it'll be available under reports, quick reports. So that was how that particular menu was enabled when we were reviewing a specific inward loan. So like for the object file, we can also link other related material. So we could link to activities, but we can also link to documents. So all of the activity files allow you to link to photo, audio, visual. So a condition report might link to an image showing a particular area of damage on an object. And an inward loan record might link to an external file. So if that particular loan agreement was later returned to us signed, we might save a copy of that permanently on our network drive, and we would link it here as one of the external files for that particular record. So that gives you an overview of the key features that are available for inward and outward loans and some general concepts that we have for the activity files.